You're about to enter a new dimension where boundaries of life sciences, data, and technology blur, and AI reshapes what's possible. Welcome to the Improzone, powered by Improzo.
Welcome back to the Improzone, and we're going to do something a little bit different today, which I'm super excited about. We have Nathan Trueblood back from Encrypt AI, and what we thought would be helpful and kind of a follow up from our longer form conversation that we had was to really dig into the arc of adoption of AI in a pharma company. So if you think about what that might look like, we're going to start with what we would call a step one or baby steps, which is just really that first use case and the first sort of engagement with AI for a pharma company. And then we're going to do 3 more episodes after that. So this is part 1 of 4. Episode 2 is going to be about going from just using AI to actually building things with it. Episode 3, we're going to get into using all these third party tools that have AI sort of inside of them. And then last sort of masterclass will be about externally facing AI tools that are actually talking directly to external customers and stakeholders. So to start us off with episode 1, I think the biggest thing we want to make sure that we talk about is this beginning stage, which is where a lot of companies are. So I think this is an important one to start with. What happens when a pharma company really starts to use AI tools, even as simple as just Chat GPT out of the box? And what can go wrong, right? If you do that without really thinking through the repercussions. So, Nathan, we both hear stories of some CEO who's really excited about ChatGPT and they get themselves a copy and they're using it and they say, like, everybody should just have this ChatGPT thing. What happens typically in your experience in those early days, those early adoption phases?
A great question, Jane, and it's exciting because I think everyone on some level is exploring with AI right now. And I think in the context of enterprise, everyone is really excited about potential productivity gains and the kinds of things that just even something as straightforward as ChatGPT can do. And so there's like lots of enthusiasm. And sometimes with that enthusiasm, people aren't always thinking about what are some of the risks, what are some of the downsides that could happen. But usually what you see at the beginning, and you mentioned the example of the CEO, I mean, that's one situation, but I think even more commonly is when people are presented with something that's going to save them time, make them more productive, they're going to grab a hold of that and start using it. And so oftentimes this begins with, well, maybe people want to start using Chat GPT. They might be using it at home, not even at work.
Right. For personal stuff, they were already
Going
using it,
there
right?
personally.
Yeah.
Oftentimes what we see with new technology like this is enterprises react by trying to stop everything. No, we're going to declare that all of this is blocked. And I've talked to quite a few enterprises that are taking that approach. But then at the same time, there's pressure. Well, but there's productivity gains here. What could we be doing here? So some of the first baby steps that we see is starting to figure out how do you embrace this change that's happening, but do it in a way that that is going to be successful, where you have some idea of visibility. One thing I'll say about that, and we can get into this a little more detail, it very much reminds me. So I have a long history in working in enterprise software companies. I used to work at Box.com,
Mhm.
and Box was initially known as a file sharing company.
Right.
And beginning of many enterprises, it was like file sharing was absolutely forbidden,
Yeah.
absolutely forbidden. But employees figured out, yeah, but it's so incredibly helpful and
Right.
to be able to share things, not have to send it via email, to be able to work on something from my device at home. But the initial approach was block everything.
Right. Or
So
when they had those USB drives with like a code on them, right? Where
right,
you
right,
could,
right.
yeah.
And so they started like, no, none of the, we've removed the USB port on your laptop.
Yeah.
And so the initial reaction is often to say no to everything. But what then started to emerge over time was people embracing this if you could put appropriate controls around it. Because
Right.
employees will find a way. No matter how much you say no, they're going to find a way. So better to figure out how you can work with a trend like this than to try to stop it. Because you may find you're behind, you may find you're missing out on productivity. But I think there's a lot of discussion going on right now about do we block everything? Do we just make it totally open? How do we proceed to learn without taking unnecessary risk?
Right, right. So I guess if I'm a CIO or a CISO or somebody in that kind of a role, what should I be worried about at this baby stage as you're describing it?
What I hear from a lot of the CIOs and CISOs that we talk to, I think the first part of it is just wanting to get some visibility into what's going on. And so this is where there's a couple of ways we see people doing this. One is maybe you say, well, we're going to sanction ChatGPT and say it's okay. But we want to put some controls around that so at least we have visibility. So this is sort of taking a step towards embracing it. And
Mhm.
saying, all right, we're going to block everything else. We're giving people access to ChatGPT, but we're going to give them some rules of the road in terms of a policy, essentially. Like, what can you do and what can you not do? So visibility is key because you kind of don't know what the risks are. And this is where a lot of the market is right now, which is you don't know what you don't know. So when I talk to CIOs and CISOs, they're like, well, we want to embrace this, but I don't even know what risks I should be concerned about. The technology's new and it's moving fast. So the kind of risks we see, starting with visibility is I just want to understand what's going on. But then in terms of the risks, it's things like are employees putting in proprietary information and is that finding its way out to ChatGPT? That could be an issue, especially if you have strict data privacy regulation. Another example of this would be, well, in terms of the response coming back from something like ChatGPT or others, um, is this an appropriate response? Is it
Right.
accurate?
Right.
Um, is it potentially violating policy where that policy may not be strictly security? It might just be like, well, this is sort of inappropriate use or an inappropriate response. We've seen things over the last year or two, like maybe an employee's very productive using ChatGPT, but what if the stuff they're getting from ChatGPT is just flat not factual,
Right.
right?
Right.
I think we've
And they
had.
don't know enough to know that it's inaccurate, so they just kind of I think this is, referred to as work slop, right? That's the new term, like, if you
Oh, I
just kinda
haven't heard
made
that one.
something
I
up.
like that. But yeah,
Yeah,
they
I'll
don't know
I'll
what's
see if I can find the article I read
yeah,
about it, but basically the
yeah,
idea is that, like, you created something that's kinda nonsensical and you didn't really check it, you just sent it off to the next person, and then they're trying to figure out what to do with
yeah.
this, like, English correct but weird thing
It
that you've
sounds right,
sent
but
them.
it's not saying anything. And we
Yeah.
actually saw some examples of that in the last year or two in terms of media companies getting called out with articles they'd written where it was like, wait a second, like A, this doesn't say anything, and B, clearly no human was involved in this, and C, it's factually incorrect. Um, so I think understanding what people are doing, so that's the visibility part, and then starting to say, well, let's put some monitoring around those behaviors. Like maybe you have a policy that says you can't put private information in here, but are people doing it anyway?
Right. Right.
And so I think just getting some sense of where the risks are in your organization so that you can then start to put controls around it.
And I think then you think about the healthcare lens, which is like another layer of complexity. You have a number of healthcare specific data privacy guidelines, and
Yeah.
then you also have just the run of the mill data privacy like CCPA, which applies to everyone.
Yes.
So trying to figure out where and how do you make sure PHI or PII is carefully like segregated, and maybe even more focus on those kinds of data being a risky place to go. I think the other thing I was going to ask you about is that there's a lot of questions about what data does the LLM have access to within your environment, because certainly what seems to be a challenge with something like Copilot, for example, is that it kind of has access by default to everything, and
Yes.
that's has some really undesirable consequences. Do you find that some of the other options besides that, which I think is one of the more tested ones, is trying to just turn on this feature in your office environment, things like Claude or ChatGPT, is that a little more limited by default? Like, is there some opportunity to have a maybe a safe is a relative term, but like a safer launch if you use something that isn't looking at all of your data all at once out the gates? Is that something you could
I
see?
mean, I think it's an interesting balancing act between the more you can uh, use your own data and your own context, the more powerful these tools can be, right? And what I'm seeing in customers I'm talking to is, and even in the market, like Copilot or Gemini or these different AI tools, they're getting better at the game in terms of providing a basic level of safety, even starting to expand into things like some basic ideas around data privacy, what can go in, what can go out, and those are big concerns, and I think that's helping with adoption. What it's not doing, though, which is where we come in, and I keep seeing this again and again, is like, well, okay, Copilot's providing us a basic level of protection, but they don't go down to the level of, well, what about a pharma company? What about the specific data privacy or regulations, whether it's CCPA or other regulations? What about our business? So that's where, again, getting some visibility in just to see what are people typing in there, but then looking at a way above and beyond what, say, Copilot can do. Can we operationalize what I call compliance guardrails? So we can get some visibility into what are people doing? Doesn't have to be blocking, but what are people doing that is potentially risky behavior according to our business context?
And I
So
guess, that's the tension, right? Because I think there's also a whole set of people who would say the more you lock this down, so to your point, not locking it down, but just observing. But if you are starting to put these guardrails of like you can't use this for that, or this is not allowed, or this query is whatever, it's not acceptable. Do you think that's a problem for slowing down the effectiveness or the innovation that comes from a generative AI solution?
I think it's a question of setting things up in an appropriate way. So you don't need to block everything, but that's often how people they have an overreact, right? Oh, we're just going
Yeah.
to block everything. Or if you put in controls that are so locked down, oh, you can't put any data in here at all. So you can ask it a question, but you can't actually use your own context or files or whatnot. Well, effectively, you're making the tool ineffective. You're dumbing it down to the point where it's like, well, it's not terribly helpful, so you're not going to get the productivity gains. So then it becomes more nuanced. Well, there are some rules of the road here, in terms of using these tools. And what we're seeing is a lot of companies have policies that they'll give to employees. Hey, here's what you can and can't do. Do the right thing. And that's kind of been how we've approached technology for a long time. But the way we think about it from Encrypt AI is we introduce compliance or policy focused guardrails, which is let's take do the right thing, operationalize that, and then let's just monitor right now to see are employees doing the right thing, or are we seeing there's a lot of instances where they're putting data in that they shouldn't be, or that we're seeing instances of responses coming back that are hallucinations, things like that. So monitoring is key there, but it's not just monitoring in general, not just what people are doing. Is the behavior consistent with what we've told everyone already? And then maybe you need to put in further controls that are blocking if people are not using the tools appropriately. But I
That
really think
makes
it first comes
Yeah.
down to just visibility into, are people using these tools in the right way?
That makes total sense. And so I guess, to kind of wrap it up, I guess, and this is a shorter one of these, when a company's getting to that place where they've got that in place, at least they're monitoring,
Yeah.
what does that transition look like when you're no longer just experimenting, but you actually have some monitoring in place, you have kind of some guidance. Like how do you make that transition? How does that sort of feel when you're in that and you're going from crawling to walking, if you will, when it comes to adoption?
Well, I think what happens really in that transition is going from exploring to actually unlocking the productivity benefits, however that's defined for you. But in the early days, you're exploring, you're not sure what can be possible. And if you hamstring these tools, well, then you sort of learn, well, we tried AI and it wasn't helpful. Like, okay, but you didn't really embrace it in a
Yeah.
way that would be productive. When you start to go from crawling to walking, it's like, well, now we have some visibility. Now we have some way to put governance around this. Now we can actually go a lot faster and start unlocking the productivity gains. So this is something I say a lot, which is, there's $1 trillion of pressure from AI on everyone to do something productive, but it's fears over potential leakage, potential reputational damage, those kinds of things that are holding everyone back. I'll come back to my other metaphor from a minute ago about file sharing.
Yeah.
Um, when file sharing came about, and this is kind of part of the box story, it was like most companies, especially large regulated ones, were like, no, and they blocked everything. And then employees were copying things to each other, putting them in unsafe places. So then, and we would go to them and companies would say, oh, well, we don't allow file sharing. We'd say, actually, 200 of your employees are file sharing right now.
Right.
Why don't we put some appropriate controls around it? and then you can embrace this. And that was kind of the step function that happened, and that's what gave launch to Box becoming a successful company. But I think it's what's going to really unlock the AI opportunity. Like if we can put appropriate visibility and controls around this, then we can go faster. I like to say, if you're wearing the right safety equipment, if you're racing a motorcycle, if you're wearing leathers and a helmet, you can go really fast. You have a lot of confidence. If you're naked, you're going to go pretty slow and be really, really careful. So
to be fair, I probably would go slow either way, but I totally get the benefit.
But you get the idea. But I think with
Totally.
the right safety equipment, it actually allows enterprises to balance speed and safety, and speed and risk, so they can go fast.
I love that. So I guess lesson here is, first off, don't be in denial. This is happening. You're going to have to figure it out. You don't need a perfect policy to get started. You can, really just give some reasonable guardrails. I would add, maybe as an aside, just from my experience, it's also good to start a little bit smaller. Like, don't roll this tool out to everybody in your whole corporation all at once. Maybe have like a group that gives you some feedback early on and kind of
you're going to have teams that are going to be on the leading edge there. That's right.
Yeah, there's probably people that are already
understanding the patterns there and then scaling that. These are really good practices when adopting any new technology. That's
true. Right. It's not unique to AI, but I think it's especially, don't forget that that's still a good practice. And then I think, the idea that you go from visibility first and monitoring, and then kind of noticing what you notice, noticing what you see in that monitoring. And then eventually you're able to really match up your intended processes and policies with the actual behaviors and outcomes. So that makes it actually a real thing. So there you go. There's kind of your baby step. Hopefully folks enjoyed learning about that, and stay tuned for the other mini podcasts that we have. Thanks again so much, Nathan, for doing this with me.
My pleasure. I love talking about technology transformation, and this is a big one. It's really exciting to see how this is taking shape.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks for stepping into the Improzone.
Thanks, Jane.
This has been the Improzone, improving life, empowering customers. Follow us and stay tuned for what's next.